You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.
Hi there, thanks for joining us on this week's Campus podcast. I'm your host, Miranda Prynne, editor of Campus, which many of you may know is Times Higher Education's platform where we showcase practical advice and professional insight from those working in universities around the world. So that covers everything from teaching advice and research tips to ways to support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this week, with world leaders gathering in Azerbaijan for the COP29 Climate Change Summit and the fate of the planet hanging in the balance as negotiations rumble on, we've been focused on climate change in relation to universities, looking at their role in advancing sustainability and reducing carbon emissions. Climate change is rarely out of the headlines these days, with extreme weather events ever more common. Most recently, we've seen devastating floods in Spain, a super typhoon hitting the Philippines, which is the sixth major storm to hit the country in a month. There's also been unusually high numbers of big storms developing in the Atlantic, with hurricanes Milton and Helene causing massive destruction and deaths in the US. And that's just a snippet. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and hopeless, but the amazing work of academics and others in higher education dedicated to finding a way out of this crisis does provide a guiding light. Universities are uniquely positioned to educate the next generation of environmental leaders and find solutions to stop planetary warming and enable us to live sustainably. But this is not an easy task, and institutions must make sustainability a core priority and lead from the front by addressing their own emissions if they are to drive the transformative change that we so dearly need. We spoke to two experts in this space to find out how they and their institutions are driving action on climate change. My colleague Eliza spoke to Tripp Shealy, who is an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering at Virginia Tech University, whose research looks at how climate and environmental issues are handled in land development and construction. And as we'll hear, he is also keen to equip his students with the knowledge and skills that they will need to work towards more sustainable design and engineering solutions. His interview is really informative and inspiring for anyone wishing to embed climate issues more effectively into their teaching. I spoke to Liz Price, who is Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor for Sustainability at Manchester Metropolitan University. She's also a Professor of Environmental Education. I asked Liz about how Manchester Met has implemented a whole institution approach to reaching net zero in just 14 years' time, and what she thinks is the most powerful driver of widespread behaviour change. But first, let's hear from Tripp.
Hi Tripp, and welcome to this episode of Campus by Times Higher Education.
I'm happy to be here.
Just for the non-civil engineers out there, myself included, what sorts of environmental challenges are you having to address within your teaching?
Sure. So by the time I see the senior engineering students, fourth year students, they get it just from everything else in their life. I mean, when I ask them the first day of class, like, what's the biggest threat that we're going to face as society in your lifetime? 80% of the class agrees that climate change is the existential threat that we're all facing. What I try to teach them is what we can do about it. And I think that's the gap. When I go talk to professional engineers, they say, yeah, we get it, but our clients don't want to hear it. And if we tell them these things, bad things happen. They can't build there. It's going to cost them more money. We're going to have to do a special design that's not approved. And so what I try to help them do, both at the teaching level and professionals is how do we reframe it? How do we talk to developers and clients and governments about the types of changes that we can have? Where's the little pieces that we can go above just the codes and standards? And so having those conversations about how do we address that with our clients, and then what's within our engineering capacity to make change. When we're building a parking garage, talking to a client about how many electric vehicle stations do we want today, but how many may you want 5 years or 10 years from now? Because we're designing this building to last 75 years, and society is going to look a whole lot different 25, 50 years from now than it is today. And so, helping them be able to frame that information to a client where it resonates with them, I think is the biggest thing. And it's not the hard engineering. The engineering piece is actually easy, but this is kind of the behavioral, social, soft skills that really matter.
Well, you wrote about that for campus. I think you wrote about needing to balance this discipline-specific teaching, so like you say, hard engineering, with other elements that might be, say, more interdisciplinary, or bringing in elements such as communication, as you were saying, and also creativity. Is this a surprise to students when they come into your classes? Are they necessarily expecting to be thinking about these sorts of ideas?
It's very much a surprise. And by the fourth year, they've been kind of trained and ingrained, and they know what engineering is. And I try to tell them that it's not that, and show them in different ways, and invite guest speakers in that kind of help reiterate the things that I'm saying, that the hardest part isn't necessarily the design, it's going to the community meeting and explaining that to the community of what you're doing. And my argument that I make to my colleagues and peers is we do a really good job in engineering, civil engineering, of teaching the formal sciences like mathematics, and physical sciences like physics and chemistry. But honestly, a pretty bad job of integrating in social and behavioral sciences. And to me, the definition of engineering is the creative application of science. And so we're trying to give them these tools. Physics is really important. Chemistry is really important. Mathematics is really important. But we also need to integrate kind of the behavioral and social sciences to give them those tools in their toolbox to be the most effective engineer. And more importantly, I think sustainability, we're not going to build our way out of this. I think we also need to think about what we can do with what we already have. How do we do it with less? There's a funny TED Talk by a guy named Rory Sutherland, and he goes through this example of people didn't like the train. They gave a bunch of money to engineers, and they made the train faster. Rational solution: people don't like being on it. Reduce the time that they have to be on it. An opposite solution, which could cost a whole lot less money, is make the train more enjoyable. Give them internet, pay supermodels to hand out free drinks. And so we can look at these problems in different ways, and it may not just be the hard engineering solution that is the best one. And so that, to me, is why the interdisciplinary piece is so important, because it's the systems thinking, it's helping them see perspectives in different ways, approach the problem with different tools in their toolbox.
And what kind of guest speakers do you get coming in?
Yeah, these are civil engineering classes, so it's mainly civil engineering industry professionals. But what I try to do is bring in the people to showcase the projects that are done well, and help them see that there are changes in the industry, that status quo doesn't exist, that there are people pushing the envelope. The problem with just doing that, though, is they're still one-off, and those projects are really helpful to see. But I think it's also really important for them to face challenges. And so for my adaptive reuse class, we do this redevelopment project, and I invite faculty members from real estate that could care less about walkability, that could care less about human-centered design and sidewalks and pedestrians. They think, more cars means that property is worth more money because it has more eyes on it, right? And the whole semester, I've taught them kind of the opposite of how do we prioritize mixed-use development and humans over cars, and what designs like that should look like. And then they do their presentations in front of these faculty that are from industry and kind of used to thinking about these projects for the last 20 or 30 years that haven't done that. And they just get grilled. And you can see the students unprepared for that. They think they're going into this friendly environment, and it really pushes them to face, what they're going to face in the real world. Developers that are saying, I've been doing, this is my model. I've been doing it this way for 20 years. Why are you telling me something different? And kind of forcing them to think about it in the different ways. So I think it's helpful to see both. They need to see, look, change is possible and it can happen, but then also be kind of confronted with the way that the world currently works in industry, and have them uncomfortable in those situations and have to explain why they made certain decisions that they did.
Do you think your students understand the extent to which environmental challenges are going to impact their lives and careers?
That's a good question. And I think that they get the importance of it. When I ask them, what do you think are the biggest challenges you're going to face in their career, they get it. But there's definitely a disconnect between, and it's in industry too. You go talk to civil engineers working, there's nobody that I talk to that says we don't believe in climate change. Those days have passed. I mean, I think the majority of people are coming at it from a good place of okay, what do we do about it? What does this actually mean? And how far can we go? And there's a wide spectrum there. At the undergraduate level or in higher ed, that's where I come in. I'm trying to show them here are the solutions. Here's what different best management practices. Here's where you can make that change and have agency, and try to, the more real projects I can help them see, I think the better they're prepared to go out and try to make those changes in the real world.
That makes sense.
But there's definitely a disconnect. I mean, they think that not littering or littering less will have a big effect on CO2 emissions, and it's good for the environment. But there's several stages of trash on the ground to wider CO2 emissions. So they're helping them recognize where those CO2 emissions coming from, what can we do about it, what's realistic, electrification, helping them prioritize, these are the most important things we should be focusing on. They don't get that without being taught it.
I wanted to ask you how your own thinking has evolved. I wondered if you could perhaps share some points at which your own thinking changed and moved forward.
Yeah, I think spending a sabbatical in the UK opened my eyes a lot to just what's happening across Europe and in the UK. I spent times in the Netherlands and traveling around the UK, Bristol and London. And so I think it was very helpful to kind of get outside of my own comfort zone a little bit and pick up tips and tricks from other universities. I was really impressed at Strathclyde and other universities I visited of kind of how important at the university level measuring their CO2 emissions were. And they were already thinking about scope 3 emissions of how do we get our international students to travel less on the holidays, because those CO2 emissions for that travel is part of what we're measuring. And unfortunately, in the US, we're nowhere close to scope 3 emissions. And so there's a lot of opportunity, I think, that I've come back with of helping develop this climate action living lab and helping the university get on board with some of these things and recognize the financial benefits that could come from energy savings, and doing a lot of what I saw in the Netherlands and the UK back here on our campus. I was in not a civil engineering department at the University of Strathclyde. I was in design, manufacturing, and engineering management. And it's more of an industrial design, product design program. And that was intentional. I know civil engineering. I've spent 10 years studying it and another 10 years teaching it. And so I wanted to be in a place that was different than what I know. And what I learned from that was more on this idea of design thinking and prototyping and testing and getting feedback. Oftentimes we build these big, massive infrastructure projects and we go on to the next one. And because we don't teach behavioral and social sciences very well, we also don't model human behavior very well. And so I think this idea of prototyping and testing and more broadly design thinking and how that trying to bring that back into civil engineering. For example, on campus, Virginia Tech's campus, there's a road that I cycle on twice a day to the nursery to pick up my child. And there's no bike lane. It's a big thoroughfare of campus, but there's parallel parking. And I've been asking for years to remove the parallel parking and install a bike lane. And they just won't, it won't happen because they value each of those spots between $2,000 and $5,000. And if you know, $5,000 times 40 spots, they don't want to lose that revenue, and the bike lane they won't make any revenue off of. And so, we talk about this in my class of here are some real world examples of why change doesn't happen. And so using kind of the design thinking approach that I learned at Strathclyde of why don't we just try it? Let's close it for a weekend and put up cones and hay bales and let's just try it and see how well it's liked and how well it's used. It'll go back on Monday, and let's just try this for a weekend and see what happens. That really hasn't been done in civil engineering. We plan and we plan and we plan, and then we implement, and then we kind of move on. And this idea of let's just try this for a weekend and see is a very different approach to how we think about the built environment and places that we live. COVID was a really good example of we shut down streets, and that never would have been shut down if COVID hadn't have happened. And even here locally, one of the streets is never going to reopen. It was it was so well liked as a pedestrian area and had tents. And that would not have happened. We never would have closed that road. We thought traffic would have been too bad, or it just wouldn't have been accepted. But trying this out and knowing that we can go back if we need to, enabled this idea of prototyping and let's be more inventive and creative and a little bit less risk averse in trying these things. So that's on a personal level, implementing the idea of design thinking and prototyping and testing at a larger scale, not just like products that we can hold in our hands, but in the communities that we live in, is something that I've tried to implement.
That's really inspiring. I wanted to ask you for a final question. Whether or not you had some pointers or some pieces of advice for other educators about how to make the sorts of changes that you're talking about within teaching happen. So perhaps ways to broaden students' thinking beyond their disciplines, or how to use the SDGs as a framework for more interdisciplinary teaching.
That's a good question. I mean, I think on the SDGs, a simple exercise that I do is this two birds, one stone exercise, I call it, that I have them look at different types of solutions to one of the SDGs and then map how it's related to the others. And the idea is that they're all connected. We can have one solution that affects multiple SDGs. And so I think helping them get this sense of a systems thinking approach, that your design decisions have ripple effects that affect multiple things, and making them aware of that is really important. So that's an easy exercise that I do. I think on a bigger scale, my experience on sabbatical and traveling for research is that helping students get a global perspective is really important. At the undergraduate engineering level in the US, that's really hard because the curriculum is just so tight and it's so packed. And doing a semester abroad and all of those classes not counting towards their degree means that it'll extend their time to completion. So what we're doing is, so next fall, I will be in Switzerland and bringing engineering students at Virginia Tech, taking Virginia Tech classes that I'll teach, and we're just going to do it in Switzerland. And so it won't slow them down at all. They'll be right on track. They'll be, interacting with faculty members from Virginia Tech in Virginia Tech classes, just not on campus. And so we're going to spend a semester in Switzerland and do excursions into Italy, and I'm going to take them to places in Germany and France and the Netherlands. And I think helping them see, like, look, in the 1970s, the Netherlands was going the direction that many US cities were going, and here's how they changed it. And we make roads safer by taking all the obstacles out of the way, wider roads, less trees, straight. In the Netherlands, they've done the opposite. They've made it much tighter, more people, more things in the road, and look at our safety records, and the Netherlands is much better than ours. Why is that the case? And it's, you put people in those environments and they go slower. You put people on straight roads with less distractions and they go faster. And so I think, helping them confront there are other solutions out there, and trying to bring that back to their careers in the U.S. is really important. So that's one of the ways that we've figured out how to do these study abroads, is just bring the faculty with them.
That's great. I believe, did I also read that you had asked your students to try to replicate a program that you'd seen, I think maybe a food waste or a recycling program of some description? Did I have that right?
Yeah. On sabbatical, I spent some time at TU Delft, and they had I think a lot of very interesting programs and research broadly about the circular economy and how to reduce waste. And one of the programs that they had is you buy these blue chips and you turn the chip in to get a cup for coffee at the cafe. And when you turn the cup back in, you get your chip back. And so when I came back from sabbatical and work with students in this, and we have a green engineering minor, and similarly, they were working with our cafeterias and restaurants on campus to figure out how to reduce waste, and introduced them to this idea and say, here's this idea that works over here. You should talk to the people that run it. What could a similar system look like on our campus? And then they ran with it. And so I think that global perspective and going and seeing what other universities are doing is really important to bring those ideas back and share those ideas.
I have really enjoyed this conversation with you today, Tripp, and I hope that our listeners will take away some really valuable advice and insight into how environmental concerns can feed into the teaching. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, Tripp's students have got some exciting times ahead of them. There is so much to pick over there. I was really struck by the fact that Tripp identifies communication skills, essentially the ability to effectively communicate climate needs and persuade clients or developers to make the necessary adaptations. He identifies that as the most important skill his students will need, and not the engineering expertise. It's a very potent argument for why interdisciplinary approaches are needed to develop these effective solutions to climate change. Now, when I spoke to Liz, I was keen to find out how Manchester Met supports its own staff to embed sustainability into teaching across disciplines. But I started by asking her about the broader institutional strategy, given the university's strong track record on sustainability. Hi Liz, great to talk to you today.
Hi Miranda.
So Manchester Metropolitan University ranks very highly for sustainability. It's, I believe, in the top 3% of institutions globally, and I noticed leapt up THE's impact rankings this year to 44th in the world. So what are you doing that sets you apart in this space?
Well, I think importantly, we take a whole institution approach to sustainability, meaning our campus development has a focus on sustainability. We're embedding sustainability throughout our education offer, and our research is addressing global sustainability challenges. And crucially, it's an approach based on what our students and our staff and our partners told us we should be doing. And so it's really embraced by everyone. And I think that's been incredibly valuable. Just to give you an example in relation to education, we've got a spectrum of initiatives that we employ. So we've committed to embed education for sustainable development and carbon literacy in all our programmes. So our graduates can be change agents for sustainability, whatever discipline or career path they take. But in addition, we offer a range of specialist programs supporting, for example, nature-based solutions, sustainable business, the energy transition, and adaptive reuse of buildings. And all of these are underpinned by our research. We also provide continuous learning opportunities for those already in work, including the Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability Practitioner Apprenticeship, which empowers practitioners to drive innovation and ambitions for social environmental change. And finally, we're partners in the National Education Nature Park and the Climate Ambassador schemes to support schools and colleges on their sustainability journey. And what I find is there's a huge enthusiasm throughout the institution for contributing to that agenda. So I think that's what's made us really effective where we can be, although there is so much more that we need to do.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a real focus on the education side in various different guises, and I'm definitely keen to ask a bit more about what you touched on there about the education for sustainable development and carbon literacy, because I think a lot of people would be interested in how you're rolling that out. But first, I did just want to ask, your role as Pro Vice Chancellor for Sustainability was new when you took it up in 2021. How did you go about shaping it?
Well, I've been in that role of Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor for Sustainability since 2021, as you said. But prior to that, I was institutional academic lead for the environment for a couple of years before that. And I'd always been involved in sustainability at the university. So it developed very organically, but the role has really been shaped by the strategy we developed together through consultation with staff and students and external stakeholders. And we have 4 goals. So leadership for sustainability, academic innovation and impact, which is research and education, sustainable campus and practices, and engagement and partnership. And I really use that as a framework to shape my role. And really, I am very much a facilitator, as sustainability is viewed as a shared priority and responsibility across the university. We have a dedicated sustainability team in estates who lead on the campus aspect of the strategy, and I work very closely with them. But all the other goals are very much embodied by a whole institution approach. So my role is really to energize people and facilitate and empower teams to achieve the things that we all collectively decided we want to do together.
Brilliant. And just to delve into that a little more, can you point to any initiatives or projects that you feel have been particularly effective in advancing the sustainability agenda?
Well, I think there are a whole range, and I think we're going to sort of perhaps talk about campus a little bit later, and I've touched on education. I think in terms of research, what we've really tried to do is encourage people to see the value that sustainability adds to everything that they're doing, both in the way they conduct their research, but also in the impact that their research is having. So we recently had our 200-year anniversary at the university, and one of our key themes was leading sustainability. And through that, everybody got behind the initiative to demonstrate the fantastic research that's going on and amplifying the role that sustainability has in the work we do in terms of the value it adds in terms of impact to what we're doing. So that's just one example.
So it sounds like a large part of that really is amplifying the sustainability related work and things that feed into it, but also where it is an outcome.
Absolutely. I think what you find is a lot of people realize that they are doing that kind of work, and it's just about amplifying it, demonstrating the value that it adds. If we go back to education, for instance, education for sustainable development is essentially very good quality education because it focuses on transformative pedagogies that are fantastic for students but fantastic for staff to deliver. And it really delivers impact in what students are doing. It allows them to work on real life projects where they feel they have a purpose. So it really does add value to the activities that we as a university are doing already. So clearly it has its outcomes in its own right, but it adds value in terms of education, research, our partnerships. We always try to embed it in the partnerships where we're working with people. We explain what our values are as a university, and we encourage partners who share our values to work with us. And generally it has a very synergistic effect on the outcomes for everybody.
Yeah, that makes sense. You have mentioned campus. Now I see
Mhm.
Manchester Metropolitan has pledged to be carbon neutral by 2038, which is an ambitious target. Can you give us any overview of how you're doing this?
Yeah, and this is very much aligned to Manchester's target to be carbon neutral by 2038 and Greater Manchester's target as well. And we work very closely with the city and the city region. But this aspect of the strategy is very much led by my colleagues in the sustainability team in facilities and estates. But essentially, we aim to be zero carbon for our scope 1 and scope 2 carbon emissions. So those where we have a direct, those are our direct emissions, and net zero for scope 3 by 2038. And our scope 3 emissions, as I'm sure you know, cover all our indirect emissions linked to our activities. And the way we do that is we have a carbon management plan that focuses on very clear routes to getting us to zero carbon for scope 1 and 2. And that focuses on heat decarbonisation through heat pumps, electric boilers, demand reduction, and on and off-site renewable generation. And as part of that, we trial some quite innovative projects to try and see if they would be effective across the wider campus. So it's about trialing new initiatives and then putting them into practice more widely. We also use a carbon forecasting tool that enables us to model different scenarios. So I'm sure anybody working in the sector will know that, you know, you can have the best plans, but then things change, estate priorities change. And so we've got a fantastic little tool that enables us to put in if we change the use of a building, or we don't decommission a building, or we build a new building, what will the impact be on our carbon management plan and how can we account for that? And then finally, we've quantified our scope 3 emissions, and I'm sure everybody will recognise that everybody's scope 3 emissions are usually the biggest part of the emissions pathway. And we've identified where we can achieve the greatest reductions, and we're focusing on those first and then looking at the others in a sequential fashion. So really we're taking, again, a holistic approach. Although it's led by facilities and estates, we've got involvement from the whole university, particularly with our scope 3 emissions. So we've got some quite nice innovative projects looking at how we can reduce emissions in our labs, working with facilities and estates, working with academic staff, working with students to try and drive these through a living lab approach.
There are the measures that you've mentioned that you can implement relatively directly as an institution, which is not to say that they're easy, but that you do have control over, like moving to more sustainable, non-polluting energy sources, for example. But I am interested in how you as an institution can try and drive behaviour change among staff and students to improve their carbon footprint, because I'm imagining this is part of the scope 3 element.
Well, yeah, I mean, it can be both. It can be both. So yeah, I mean, the primary mechanism, I guess, that we have is carbon literacy, and we've been leading on carbon literacy. We were the first university to train our students to be carbon literate. We've been doing it for a very long time, and that's led by my colleague Rachel Dunk and Jane Mork, and a fantastic team that we've got here. And what carbon literacy does is it helps you understand the causes of climate change and identify actions that you can take to make a difference. So it's very empowering. And we've been training our students for many years. We also offer training to our staff. We train our students and our staff to become trainers, so they then can cascade that training out more widely. So our students train each other, but they also train external organisations. And we've also trained our senior leadership team in carbon literacy. And it's been fantastic for raising awareness and creating a sort of fertile environment for us to promote our sustainability strategy. And that's been incredibly successful. And we actually have a higher education toolkit for carbon literacy that is made freely available to any organisation by the Carbon Literacy Project. So it's a free toolkit and it's available to anybody who would like to use it. And we're very proud of that and the impact that carbon literacy training has had on really changing that behaviour amongst staff and students and raising awareness. It really is a lens through which people see all their behaviours, whether they're at home or at work, and it requires you to make a number of pledges, some at an individual level, but some at a group level or an organisational level. And we've really found that a fantastic engine, excuse the pun, for driving change.
Yeah, to quote a well-known politician, education, education, education seems
Absolutely.
to be the key here.
Yes.
Sticking with carbon literacy, you plan to integrate education for sustainable development and carbon literacy across all courses by 2026. So in terms of integrating it within all curricula, there are some subjects where this feels like a very natural fit, but others, to, I don't know, plucks a few out the air, like history of art or classics, where it feels like it would be trickier. And I wondered if you had any advice really on how this can be addressed.
Yes. I'll go with carbon literacy first, and I'll go with education for sustainable development, if I may. So carbon literacy is an element really of education for sustainable development, but we chose to mention both of those terms in our strategy because we think it's really important to do so. Carbon literacy is a day's worth of training. It's very prescriptive, but it can be adapted to different discipline scenarios. So the approach we've taken there is it only occurs once in a programme, and we have asked departments to nominate departmental champions who can be trained to teach carbon literacy and then roll it out through their programmes to train their students, who can then train the trainer to amplify it as they progress, because it's fantastic for student employability as well. So once our students have been trained to be trainers, it really increases their confidence and it increases and improves their graduate outcomes. So that's the approach we've taken for carbon literacy. Education for sustainable development is different because it's broader. It could be delivered by anybody, any member of academic staff, anywhere in the programme, and in more than one place in the programme, provided it's done in a coherent way. And the approach we've taken at Manchester Met is very much to make it in a way that is relevant to your discipline and the future professional practice of your students. So it's about looking at how your discipline relates to education for sustainable development and the roles that your students might go into and the kind of things that they might encounter in their professional lives, because we really believe that every role needs to have a good understanding of sustainability. And what our colleagues told us through consultation is that they would value training and guidance on embedding education for sustainable development, as well as best practice examples from lots of different disciplines. Crucially, that wouldn't increase the burden on staff and students. So we looked around and we found a fantastic model called the Co-Designs ESD framework. That's a UNESCO endorsed framework. And we engaged with that quite significantly. And then we went on to co-create some training in consultation with staff and students from right across the university to develop some face-to-face light touch training and then a more in-depth online format of training. So people can really see how they can either adapt existing programs, or if it's program review time, to rewrite their programs. But it's very much seen as a reframing of the curriculum. And it has sort of three essential components. One is learning objectives for the Sustainable Development Goals and how the different Sustainable Development Goals relate to your discipline and the future profession of your students. The second is UNESCO's core competencies for sustainability, which we have mapped to our graduate attributes. So it's all interconnected and seamless with the delivery that colleagues are doing. And then finally, transformative pedagogies, which is essentially good learning and teaching practice. And recognising that different departments are at different stages, we've also developed a hierarchy of engagement to support departments at different stages of the process. So we've got a minimum threshold and then an opportunity to work up to have increasing engagement. And the crucial thing, I think, is to do it together and consult and consult and consult, both with staff and with students, and really listen to what people are telling you they need. And then hopefully you will come up with a model that actually does what you set out to do.
Yeah, that's really useful for anyone listening, because that sounds like a framework that could be picked up and applied by others.
Absolutely. And the Co-Design's ESD framework, there's a toolkit that's available for free as well, but we've just adapted the training a little bit to fit our scenario. But the Co-Design's ESD framework and toolkit is free to download online as well. So we really try to focus on, both with carbon literacy and with the Co-Design's ESD framework, approaches that can be amplified across the sector because they are free.
Yeah, brilliant. Moving on, could you tell me a bit about the Manchester Climate Change Partnership? That's what lessons this model could offer for other regional partnerships focused on climate action.
Yes, of course. I mean, I think we're very lucky in Manchester because Manchester City Council and Greater Manchester Combined Authority are very switched on and are very pro collaboration and working together. So as a university, we work with a number of sort of partnerships, but the Manchester Climate Change Partnership is particularly strong, I think. It was established in 2018 and it brings together organisations right across the city. So from the public sector, the private sector, community organisations, faith groups, health organisations, culture, academic sectors, really to share this common goal of helping Manchester to limit its greenhouse gas emissions and build resilience to a changing climate. And the way it does it is really sort of quite straightforward, but it's always very difficult to do in practice, is develops a robust strategy and implementation plan to meet the targets for climate change and climate action, really championing the delivery of effective climate action across sectors, so sharing good practice and sort of helping each other out really with the challenges that we all face, engaging and influencing stakeholders and communities to act, and then finally providing evidence-based reporting on the city's progress towards its climate targets and objectives. And I think having those very clear goals is very valuable in terms of a useful model that others could take forward. I think the other key factors are that the City Council is instrumental in driving this forward, and that the partnership is supported by a small climate change agency who are full-time employees who actually are the engine, again, sorry to use that word, that drive this action, but really bring the whole community of the partnership together. I think if we didn't have the agency maintaining that momentum, it'd be very easy for people to be preoccupied by their own priorities.
That makes total sense. Yes, you need that project management kind of central
Exactly.
hub to bring everything together. Otherwise, I can see it would get very fragmented despite everyone's best efforts.
Exactly. And really, it's a fantastic community of organisations that are keen to make change, but we all recognise that we need urgent climate action to achieve the city's goals, and we're not anywhere near there yet, but we've got a good model to drive that forward, I think.
To finish up, are there any relatively simple things you think that all universities could do or start to do tomorrow that would reduce their emissions and improve their sustainability?
Well, I think I would probably say engage in carbon literacy, because carbon literacy is about winning hearts and minds. And once you've done that, it's the first step. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than the first step. But once you've done that, and everybody will suddenly see what they do through a different lens, and they will suddenly think about the actions that they take and whether that is going to have an impact on climate action. And it's quite a profound change, because the training is very emotive as well. So it really engages your heart through your motivations, your head through knowledge, but also your hands through practice, in that it's very practice based, and you have to deliver actions at the end of it. And I think it just makes people see the world differently. And I think that can happen relatively quickly. It's only a day's worth of training. A lot of people say, well, I can't afford a day, but it is only a day's worth of training to address climate action. And we found that a very powerful catalyst for change at Manchester Met and beyond. And then obviously the kind of things that we're talking about in terms of, energy savings and looking at how you deliver what you do, they all follow on from that. And we found, for instance, we trained all our technical services team in carbon literacy. And after that, our technical services team is very switched on about savings they can make for carbon. Similarly for our finance team. So it's not just academic staff who get trained in carbon literacy, it's everybody. And then you can have this fantastic cascade effect that rolls out across the university, where everyone is making a difference, not because they have to, but because they want to. And you can sign up for carbon literacy training very, very quickly. So have a look at the Carbon Literacy Project website. That would be my advice, really.
Yeah, that's a fantastic message to end on. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Liz. It's been great to get your insights.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, there you have it. Two people working in very different roles in very different institutions, but with a uniting message that education on climate change issues is vital for long-term change. If you're keen to find out more on this topic, we have a special spotlight guide, A Greener Future for Higher Education, where you can find loads of advice from experts all over the world looking at reducing university emissions, but also on topics such as integrating climate awareness and the Sustainable Development Goals into curricula, into research, and even into day-to-day operations. You'll find this at www.timeshighereducation.com/campus. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like and subscribe, and I will be back in a couple of weeks. Thanks very much. Bye.
You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.